Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Hey there, it's Zoe, and my goodness, we have an excellent interview for you today. It is with a repeat customer. Yes, back from episode 259, we have the amazing Marty Strong. He is a retired Navy SEAL officer and combat veteran. And since he left the SEALs, he's had a massive career in corporate America. He is CEO of at least 2 companies. He's been shot at. He's survived cancer twice. And he has sadly experienced the loss of his son. None of which we talk about. We do talk about instead his book, Be Visionary, his latest one, with the subtitle, Strategic Leadership in an Age of Optimization. I love this topic. Being visionary is something that most leaders aspire to and struggle to get to. So we get down and dirty in the brass tacks of actually how to do that. Day by day, little by little, we can become visionary. It's awesome. So let's get into it. Well, all the way from Virginia Beach, yet again, welcome to the show, Marty Strong.
Hi, Zoe.
I'm so excited to speak with you. There's so much to catch up on. You have a new book out called Be Visionary, Strategic Leadership in an Age of Optimization. And I love what you've put in this book. So it's like a lunch with lots of little surprises in it, which is awesome. So a really good meal with lots of yummy bits in it. What did you learn in writing this book? You know, as a fellow author, I know that when we write books, we often learn as we go along. So what was a big insight for you as you went about writing this thing?
So it's interesting, and it's a great question, because I was writing Be Nimble, and I had beta readers, people that were CEOs, executives, founders, etc., that I thought would be able to give me some insight of whether I was hitting the right kind of topics, you know, at the right tone and everything. And I had 4 of them or so, and all of them came back on a chapter on strategy and said, you know, you could write a whole book on this, because this is something that they're not teaching. They're not teaching strategic leadership and converting a vision into a concept into a working strategy pretty much anywhere. They don't teach it. Just like leadership is kind of that forgotten soft skill that's not taught in schools, not taught in business schools, and rarely taught in the business environment. You're just supposed to be a leader when you get to some level in the org chart, and they'll stare at you and say, do your thing. And you're like, okay, you know, all you have is the patterns you saw in the workplace, and you try to emulate them, whether they worked or they didn't work. So that led me to writing Be Visionary. So as I was writing Be Visionary, as luck would have it, I start looking into what really triggers the mind, what allows the human mind to think those big thoughts. Is it something that's like leadership? Is it nature or nurture? Is it something that can be taught, something that can be evolved and developed, or is it something that you're born with? And as I started studying and getting deeper and deeper into that, I started getting more into divergent thinking, which is thinking differently. Another kind of fancy way of saying that the brain's ability to turn on the innovative switch or turn it off. And I found that, every brain has the same chemistry. Every brain has these same kind of switches that turn on or turn off task-focused work or exploration and innovation. And they're different parts of the brain, and they aren't the same switch, and they can't be on at the same time, because one kind of distracts from the other, and you can see how that would work. So as I was writing, I started getting deeper and deeper into how the brain actually does mechanically switch into a visionary or creative mindset.
That's really exciting. So I want to unpack this a little bit more if you don't mind. Okay. So the first observation or discovery you made in your research was the brain operates differently and you can't do it at the same time. Task focus versus creativity. First question then is it a myth that some people have more creativity because their brains are wired differently, or can you just learn the techniques to hone that part of the brain as it's operating?
Well, it's not a myth in observation, like in practiced observation, because if you looked at, say, 10 people, all 10 people may have the native capability. They have the same brain. They have a human brain, but you might have a wide range of those that were encouraged to flick on that creative switch when they were young, and others that were not encouraged when they were young, some that actually were encouraged when they were young, but then that was kind of stamped out as they got older and they were focused on the surrounding environment, bosses, teachers, professors, everybody's telling them to conform, obey, comply. If you think about that, you get into a university experience and you're in a discipline, and they call it a discipline for a reason. You're really a historian. If you're an engineer, you're learning about the history of engineering. You're an architect, it's the history of architecture. You're a doctor, it's the history of everything they've learned up to that point. These are not soothsaying schools. They don't sit down and say, what do you think the future is going to look like? Let's talk about how to figure that out. So it's not taught, which means it's not developed or encouraged, and in fact, it actually is kind of stamped out and discouraged because they want you to memorize the formulas, the history, the physics, the laws, the rules. And so even if you started out as a young person that was encouraged to be creative, if you're in that kind of lane in life, your brain's capable mechanically to do this, but it's not being allowed to, and so it becomes like a dormant capability. So you're looking at those 10 people, all 10 are capable physically, but you got a wide range of experiences early in life and where they are now professionally.
Okay. So it's a little bit of nurturing that is required to flick the switch on the creative brain.
Correct. And I don't think there's an age barrier to it. I don't think you have to be 6 years old to have fun, coloring or looking at a sunset. And
I hope not.
It's something we're all capable of doing, and you can be reintroduced to it, and you can be taught how to turn off that targeted, focused, task list part of your brain, which is an important part of your brain. It's kind of like the subtitle of the book. Optimization, efficiency, and task focus is critical, because if you don't have that at all, you'd end up stepping on, a landmine, or you'd be getting eaten by a dinosaur because you didn't pay attention to a noise you heard. So it's a key part of human survival. But the other part of your brain is really important too. The exploration innovation part comes from our initial need to forage, to look for food, to seek opportunities to survive to the next day. And that, again, because it's, we don't have to worry about where our food comes from so much. Most people, at least in, Australia, the United States, Europe, we go to a store and get our food. But 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, people had to figure out how far away from this comfort zone, this little pond I found, and this source of food that took my family or handled my family's needs for about a week, but now is expended because we ate it all. How much risk do I want to take, and which direction do I want to go in to go look for that next place? And so that was a part of the human brain process, the way we thought, the way we survived. It's just we don't need it as much now because we're not that concerned about where the next meal is coming from. But it's still there, and so it can be developed.
All right, so let's talk about that, because you mentioned it can be developed and that there's triggers to get us into that creative state. And it's nice to have the background understanding that the brain was developed from our need to forage and to find something. So coming back to today, what are the switches to flicking on the creative brain, and what can leaders do to activate it and work on it?
So, there's kind of the tried and true ways of getting your brain to kind of come off treadmill mode, which, that's the task-oriented, problem-solving, to-do list kind of, never-ending personal, professional, key performance indicator list. And one's, meditating, and that does work. It does kind of take your mind off that hardcore focus. Another one, believe it or not, is walking, running, exercising. Those also tend to stimulate chemicals in your brain that give you a feeling of euphoria, a feeling of calm, and it's hard for the brain to get really serious about task-focused duties when it's in that state. And so you tend to it lets the brain wander. The whole idea of the brain wandering is what I mean by you get off the treadmill for a while. You can also do, I think I may have said it the last time I was on your show, I'm a big proponent of it. It doesn't have to be meditation, but taking anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes a day and clearing your mind of all those to-do lists and just focusing on I do it as a time horizon. What do I want next week to look like and be like and feel like for myself, for my family, for my business, if I'm a leader, for the group that I'm responsible for. And then I push it out to maybe a month, and I push it out 6 months. And I'm doing this all in one session. And I spend maybe a minute or two on each kind of threshold of each horizon. And then eventually if you do it enough, you do it every day for a couple of weeks, you'll start to get very comfortable moving through that and jumping out to 36 months, 48 months. And depending on where you are in life, you start thinking about, am I in the profession I want to be in? Am I at the level I want to be in? What do I have to do to get there? If the answer is no. So what you're doing is you're starting to realize that in the context of the future, you're not set up, you're not on track, you don't even have a plan to get to some place that you'd rather be. So now you get to back plan from those goals out there somewhere and start setting up your milestones. You need certifications, you need some other kind of education. Maybe what you're going to do is to not be working at all. Maybe you're going to completely change your angle of life. But it allows you to now assess all the to-do list. Now you switch over to your to-do list, task list, but now it's to focus on getting to some place that's worthy that you've developed by doing a visionary thought process. So vision, concept, then you develop it back into a strategy that makes sense, and then the milestones, which is like your operational plan, which is what Be Visionary basically, the first half of Be Visionary is all about what we've just spoken about. You can be visionary. This isn't something that only gifted people do or special people do. It can be learned, and then you can apply it, and everybody should do it, not just leaders. And leaders should encourage that environment in everybody, because then you get that bubble up effect of creativity. So, those are all things I talk about in the book, but they're all things I practice also.
I love that time horizon visualization exercising. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that one. We need to unpack three big concepts, essentially, which are all in the title of your book, Be Visionary. And I was curious about two things around the whole book. So Be Visionary, what's the difference between being visionary and being strategic? Question number one. And actually, no, we'll start there. I won't load you up with questions. We'll just start there. What's the difference between being visionary and being strategic?
Well, one thing, the word strategic and strategy gets very muddled in usage these days. I like to look at it this way. You can use it as a verb or you can use it as a noun. Somebody will say, well, what's your strategy to achieve your goal? Well, they're using it as a verb. They're basically saying, what is the answer to the how question? Well, that's not strategy the noun. Strategy the noun is the why or the what and the when part of the question. What are we going to do? Why are we doing it? And when is it going to get accomplished? And then you start back planning your plan, like we mentioned earlier. And then you can say, our strategy to achieve that strategic objective is laid out in this plan. So, and because people say strategy that way, it's confusing, and there's tactics, there's operations, operational thinking, operational actions, and then there's strategic actions, and they are separate, but they have to dovetail to be effective. And I think the confusion between being visionary and, because it's a call to action, really. I mean, my book titles are always be something, right? So it's a state of being, it's a mindset, it's a continuum. It's not just a thing you do on Tuesdays. So to be visionary is the way I described earlier. You have to take the time, even if you have the most intense, micro-focus, dot the I's, cross the T's kind of a job or responsibility, but you have to pull yourself, you got to stop looking at the tips of your toes, you got to look up, smell the roses and look out a little bit beyond that rose bed and say, okay, what's out there? And then it can be, dreaming and vision quest. These things are kind of the far end with no real intentions. But once you think you start to see it solidifying in your mind, it starts to become a concept. It starts to have shape and a little bit of solidity. It's three dimensions. And that's when it starts to look more like strategy, like a strategic objective, because now it's got pieces and parts and shape and maybe a defined time frame, a date. Maybe a financial target, maybe some other personal status in life. I want to get a black belt. That's not a financial goal. If I want to get a black belt in karate, that's a different kind of goal, but it's still a goal. And if it's going to take me 3 years to get there, I was dreaming of what I want to do. I've always wanted to have a black belt. How long would that take? I get a black belt, and then I go find out how long. They say 3 years. I start back planning 36 months. You see? So, and strategy is a more well-formed version of a vision or a concept.
Okay, I got it. So the vision is sort of impression, feeling, mindset. It's kind of intangible in some ways, and then the strategy puts some nuts and bolts around it.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
And, interestingly, most people in business have some idea of how to develop the strategy, nuts and bolts part, because it's basically project planning. It's just working. My daughter, I think I mentioned in the last show, Tara DeLucia, she's a certified project manager. She's a junior executive in Sydney. She's a dual citizen, Australian American, and we talk about this all the time. And she, finishes my sentence on this topic before I get to it. She says, "Well, then you just project plan back from that vision, from that point out there on the horizon." I go, "That's exactly right." And you know how to do that. And most people know how to do that if they have that kind of qualification and training.
Yeah. So the antecedent to that, though, is like how to be the visionary part, because as you say, people know how to do their project planning. They don't necessarily know how to pinpoint what might not be even pinpoint, forecast what might happen in the future. So there's two parts of your book that I want to unpack a little bit. The first one I found really interesting, and I was like, why is he talking about this up front? And then it kind of gelled a little bit for me later, where the first part of being visionary, you talk about qualities, values, mindset. Why? Why is that up front at the beginning as an aspect to being visionary?
So as we're sitting here, I'm on maybe almost the sixth year of a strategy where I bought a business that had one employee and was working in about a 20-mile radius in healthcare, and now it has almost 200 employees, and it's in 7 states. And that's a long time to hold on to that vision. It's a long time to keep the focus and the discipline and to keep, banging out those milestones and everything. But the end state, the vision from 6 years ago hasn't changed. The target, the end goal hasn't changed. The shape of what I thought the company could become hasn't changed. It's still in my mind's eye today the way it was 6 years ago. So the reason I wanted to start the book with a little bit of descriptions of what being visionary feels like, and how it's achievable. But the other part of it is you need to have some intestinal fortitude, some character strength. You need to have a couple of other skills, which a lot of them are the same leader skills I talk about in Be Nimble, but they're still applicable. If you're going to lead through the more audacious strategy program, the more this is going to apply. You can't be a wallflower. You can't be milquetoast. You have to be strong, resolute. You have to be able to stand up against the bad times and the setbacks, because that'll happen. You'll run out of resources, or you won't have enough resources to go as far as you want to go. You're going to have people that don't believe in what you're doing. People will get fatigued and stop believing in what you're doing, even if they did in the beginning. So you have to be the chief cheerleader. You have to try to get everybody else to feel the excitement and the value, and really buy into why it's important that you complete the journey. All those things are really leader attributes. And if you don't have those, or if you're really weak in all those, I don't care how good you are at creating the vision in the first place, you're never going to take a group of people in an organization and lead them to that endpoint. It'll all be sitting there on paper, and you'll get about halfway there, a third of the way there, and either you'll quit or people will quit, or the whole thing will just fall apart. So that's why I start with all those character traits, attributes, because you have to, it's kind of like an inventory like I did in Be Nimble in the beginning. You have to kind of say, what am I good at? What am I weak in? What are the things that I'm weak in that are absolutely critical to me being good at the strategic leadership game?
Hey, it's Zoe. If you're enjoying these leadership insights, join us in the Amplifiers Academy. It's bite-sized leadership development through self-paced videos and exercises, templates, checklists, resources, and an online community to connect with other leaders. It's Amplifiers Academy, your gateway to better, stronger leadership. See you there. I think that's really important for leaders to keep in mind, is that this is a holistic thing if you're going to be engaging in visionary work. The next thing you move on to is spotting trends and imagining the future. So you tipped off a little bit of how to imagine the future. The idea of picking trends and jumping on what are opportunities and avoiding threats, I think, is actually underrated as a skill. So I'm curious about how you go about identifying trends and movements that can create these futures that we want to create.
It's going to sound redundant, but I think the first thing you do is you have to get your head kind of out of the room you're sitting in. You have to get to a point where you can be objective and absorb information and information from sources that you would normally not be hearing every day, especially if you're a leader. So, everybody's heard the term groupthink. And groupthink is not necessarily zombie think. Groupthink is you could have 15 brilliant scientists in a room that have all agree with each other. Well, that's probably a problem. Because if everybody agrees with each other in the scientific method, nobody's questioning anybody's decisions, outcomes, and judgments. You don't want to have everybody agreeing, even if they're the smartest people you can find. So you want to start finding people that aren't in the room. And that means you have to get out of your comfort zone. I have kind of 3 steps that I use. The first one is intellectual humility. So that basically means you take all your past victories and all your past defeats that are clouding your judgment or influencing your judgment, either that you're making you arrogant and feeling like, I know what I'm doing and I'm very successful. I'm going to use the same play, the same formula over and over again because how can it fail? Look at my track record. Or you have the opposite, baggage that you're carrying, that you've had a bunch of missteps and some failures, and now you don't trust your own instincts. You're second guessing yourself on everything. So you have to kind of clear your mind of all that. You have to get to a point, and the humility part is you don't allow your baggage, your experience, and even your education to get in the way of the next step. And the next step is intellectual curiosity. Intellectual curiosity is the willingness to be open-minded and take a 360-degree look at the universe, the world, your market, your industry, your company. And that also means to seek other industry leaders in your industry, other industries and their leaders. Talk to people that, I use the example of if you're selling something and you have a distribution, chain or supply chain, let's say it's, dry goods of some sort, it's tennis shoes, and you're having some challenges there. Why wouldn't you talk to somebody that's moving oil through a pipeline? Why wouldn't you talk to somebody that's moving people, in aircraft and baggage into in and out of aircraft across the country? They're all doing the same thing. It's a linear supply chain exercise. They have technologies, they have software that they've used to streamline things that you're not applying because you're in the tennis shoe business, and up until now, nobody's needed that. It's amazing how many of these tips, these techniques, these capabilities that you find all around you. There's an asymmetrical invader into almost every market coming from some not necessarily adjacent market. I know of construction workers that have become CEO founders of lab testing services, where they took and Uberized, moving all the lab tests to the test centers and back to where the results have to go, using essentially like Uber or Lyft type systems and not a fleet of cars that they had to pay for. And they did it because in the construction industry, you use subcontractors like plumbers and electricians for a very short period of time, and then you move on to the next thing. And they're so comfortable with that kind of gig economy, gig talent utilization where you don't have to own the labor, that when they step into a completely other realm like healthcare in the United States, it's like this massive bureaucracy, like a big dinosaur, and they're like, wow. And they just do what they know how to do from the construction industry. I know lots of examples of this, but you would never know that sitting there in your room as a leader unless you went out there and you were curious enough to honestly seek all this crazy input. And then the third thing, if you've done all that, so you've collected all this data, sure, you can listen to your people, your normal channels of information flow, ideas, etc., but you're getting all these other insights, which is also kind of exploding your mind, and there's a lot of aha moments in that, how these things kind of come together. But that sets you up for the last phase, and that's intellectual creativity. Because at that point, you are truly being creative at an intellectual level. You're not just incrementally making something different. You might have set yourself up through these first 2 steps to do something really, really special. And that's really being creative. That's innovation, squared. And that's kind of really where you want to achieve. That's the way, I talk about and tell other leaders that's the process they should undertake to achieve that. And not just once because of one challenge. Again, do it as a discipline. Every time something's put in front of you, try to clear your mind, take a deep breath, listen to your people, and then take a couple of days and ask for all kinds of other information sources. You go find this from this source, you go find this source, 360-degree look, understand the entire universe around you before you come back and then start to get creative.
Very cool. I want to ask a tactical question. So one of the suggestions you made is get input from other industries and other leaders and so on. do you literally mean calling people up? Do you mean going to other industry conferences? Do you mean listening to podcasts? Like, from a tactical point of view, where do you source your inputs from those diverse places?
Well, all the above.
Okay.
Really, I do. I look for online articles. I Google a subject area, like say linear supply management, and I start looking for articles, and I start looking for the industries that the articles seem to be focusing on. And if I can find somebody, I'll email them and, hey, do you mind? Or go on LinkedIn and I'll LinkedIn and say, hey, I saw this article about this, and I just did a LinkedIn search, and you're a senior manager of petroleum supply chain management in Texas. Do you have a minute or two? I just want to pick your brains for a minute. I'm a CEO, blah, blah, blah. And, most of the time they'll say, sure. And then if you just say, this is kind of the problem I'm facing, it's funny, sometimes it seems juvenile to them because they're in an advanced state of, 20 years ago, they solved that in the oil business. And here you are still struggling with it like it's this massive challenge that you can't figure out. And they just hand it to you in a phone call. So you can do continuous 360-degree search, which I think is a smart thing for leaders. Soak up all the information you can. Watch all kinds of crazy stuff. I watch stuff on astrophysics. I watch and read books on mind science. And I'm a ex-Navy SEAL with 2 companies that are doing training in healthcare. So, but it's still, I find these little nuggets, these little aha moments where I go, wow, hey, that's kind of something we've been noodling on and we haven't figured out how to solve. And they figured this out, or at least it sounds like they've got an angle on this. So that's what I do. That's what I suggest. I've always believed that you have to be a lifelong learner, but you also have to be really aware, complete 360-degree awareness if you're a leader. Think about it in a simple context of, again, the primal human. You're going across the plains. You don't just walk with your eyes pointing down at the ground at the next footfall. You're looking around for saber-toothed tigers, and you're looking around for all the, you're constantly scanning, because being visionary also means looking for the threats on the horizon, not just the opportunities.
I hear you. And I think one of the things I'm thinking about in terms of the leaders that I work with, many of them are overwhelmed with just dealing with what's on their plate in front of them, getting their teams up to scratch, managing the delivery on their existing strategy. The perennial challenge I hear from many leaders is, I just don't get the time to do the strategic thinking. And it's very frustrating for them and for me to listen to it, because oh my goodness, you're always going to be reactive if you're not proactive. So I'm curious about what we can borrow from you in terms of your habits. So from your habits of thinking strategically, what do? Do you carve out a time per day to open your mind and be open to this? Is it a weekly thing? How do you incorporate it into your way of being and doing? So
2 different things. I tend to have my 10 to 20 minute, vision quest session 7 days a week, and I do it in the morning, usually around 5:30 or so, close to 6 o'clock, when I got up, had a cup of coffee, and I fed my dog, and nobody else in the house is awake, and I just kind of get into that mindset for a little while. Sometimes I'm pushing something from a week or 2 ago that popped up as a crazy idea, and now I've got it almost to a concept, and it may be where I'm starting to put down a couple of notes, because it's that nuts and bolts that you referred to. It's starting to shape up in my mind. The second method, which kind of goes to exactly what your example was, I was just talking about this today with somebody. I believe in having 75% of your day focused on either getting whatever kind of manner of feedback you get from your leadership on general operations, and you picking 1 or 2 critical high leverage issues in your sphere of responsibility that you believe you need to have your personal attention on in a deeper way. But 25% of your day, you've got to have it completely cleared, not scheduled, not cluttered with meetings. If you don't leave yourself 25% to think, and this is more operational thinking, not so much strategic thinking, but if you're not thinking operationally at all every day, what you're basically doing is, it's kind of back to what I just said in that example about the primal human. the primal human would not have survived and the family would not have survived if the leader of that group walked across the open plains staring at the ground 4 feet in front of its footfall. So something eventually would have taken that family out. And if you're a leader and you're not doing that, you're not looking up operationally, you're going to run into the same problem in the short term operationally that you're going to run into strategically if you never take time to do that first thing that I described. And I'll tell you, there's a story, not story, I mean, I was there. I had a junior officer working for me, and young officers, especially elite special forces, special operations people, the officers want to be respected by their men. They want to basically shoot, ride, parachute, and be able to do everything that the enlisted guys could do, because the enlisted guys have been there longer. Well, that's an impossible ask, because if you've been an officer for 2 years or 1 year, and the people that you're trying to compete with have been there for 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, you're not going to be as good as them. You're not going to be adept at all the things. But they still try because they think that's what they're supposed to be doing. And so I had a young officer that was kind of trying to do that, and he had a problem on a tactical exercise. And so we were doing the debrief later on, and a senior combat veteran SEAL was listening to him explain, what happened, and he finally said, "Sir, wait a minute." He said, "I never had much use for officers until I was in my first firefight, and we all had our heads down, and we were all doing our job, shooting at the bad guys. And all I kept thinking in the back of my mind was, I hope Mr. So-and-so over there has got a plan. I hope he's talking to somebody on the radio. I hope he's got help coming in here." And the point of that story is, and this is him still saying this, he said, "Sir, if you're down facing the mud, shooting your rifle like all the other enlisted guys, who's doing your job? Nobody is. So if you're a leader in an organization and you're grinding it out just like everybody else, then who the heck is doing your job? So take the 25% of the day, suck up that you're not going to be on top of everything, and check out 3 things off your to-do list. You'll become more aware at the operational level."
I love it. And I think this is a great return to the subtitle of your book, which is Strategic Leadership in an Age of Optimization. And before we hit record, we were talking about that polarity of optimization versus strategic thinking, and how I think you just explained that paradigm. You can't just be in the mud shooting at the enemy to the detriment of thinking you're getting your head above the parapet and seeing what the lay of the land is. Is that what you mean by how to do strategic thinking in the age of optimization? Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, a real simple way of getting kind of my angle here is people that are specializing in efficiency, people that are looking at dashboards and software that's giving them highly accurate, micro-measured feedback of what just happened an hour ago, yesterday, a week ago, are very proud of the fact they know exactly what is going on in their organization, business, division, whatever. Of course, what they know is exactly what happened in the rearview mirror. It doesn't give them any foresight, doesn't give them any idea what is going to happen in the future. And unfortunately, and this started with publicly traded companies in the United States about 20 years ago, they started incenting the C-suite players with stock options instead of paying them heavier and heavier salaries. Well, the deal is if your stock options, vest in 3 years, you've got 36 months as the leader. What can you do to increase the value of your stock in a short period of time? Well, you can do stock buybacks. You can get rid of people. You can cut costs. That opens up the margins, and the stock gets more valuable on paper, and sometimes it gets more valuable in the market. The average tenure in the United States for a large company CEO is 3.5 years. Kind of works out, doesn't it? So the shareholders also want that. The shareholders are, it's the thing about the shrinking, attention span. So, investing used to be 10, 15 years. You let time do the work, and compounding of money do the work. Now everybody wants it, now. I want to make money. I want to see it happen in a month. And if the CEO or the C-suite is saying, let's do this, and the stock price is going up, everybody's sharing. But what they're not doing is they have no idea if that company is going off down this path that isn't going to exist because there's a cliff, because the industry is going in a totally different way, technology is going in a different way, or their competitors are leapfrogging their capabilities, their products, their services in a way that they're never going to catch up because nobody's thinking that way in their company. So that's the problem that if you have optimizers who also, by the way, rise in the organization to become the top people. People don't look around for the dreamer in the corner and go, I think that person should be the CEO. They're looking for the person that are hitting those KPIs that can give out that, rattle off all their stats for what happened in the last month, quarter, week, whatever. So what you end up is a self-licking ice cream cone. You get exactly what you incent, and that has been that optimization, efficiency, short-term measurement, short-term gratification has replaced the idea of long-term thinking and long-term investment. It's radically reduced the amount of investment in people, plant, other resources, or even a complete strategic pivot into a better future.
And I think that comes full circle back to your first point, is that you need to have the characteristics, qualities, and values of a visionary thinker before you get into this work. Otherwise, you are not able to do that uncertain, murky work of imagining the future and leaning into that. So I think that's a nice reinforcement of that.
Of course, let me add one thing. You do need optimizers when you come up with your battle plan to achieve your strategy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can conceive the idea of something that goes from one shore of a river to the other shore, but you need engineers to build the thing you're thinking about. So you still need that. They work in concert. It shouldn't be one or the other.
That's right. It's a polarity, and you have to balance between the two. It's not a binary choice, this or that. Absolutely. So, pivoting to the future, what do you see as the most exciting trends happening out there in the world of business?
Well, I think there's this thing that's been bandied about for about the last 2 years, really, divergent thinking. And the nice thing about that particular topic is divergent thinking is essentially a fancy way of saying thinking outside of the box, thinking differently, not thinking in a parochial way, not getting into lockstep, groupthink, all those things. It's a cry for more creativity and innovation. I mean, in the United States, most of the TV shows and movies are complete reboots and copies of shows that were created in the 70s and the 60s and the 80s. It's like nothing's new. All of us of my age, we're going, well, yeah, that's this show with different people in it, And that's happening across the whole society. That's not innovation if you just switch out the actors 30 years later and use the same script, essentially, with the same concept. So there's a real hunger in the United States, for sure, to reignite creative thinking and creative development. And I don't know if the risk-taking part of all that is there yet, but the brain science is what really makes it different. And that's what I'm watching this trend, what's called neurodiversity or neurodivergence. And it's studying the brain and doing tests and things and trying to find out why a person does or doesn't act creatively, why a person does or doesn't decide to do something that's out of the box or think in that manner. And that's where we were talking about before the show. They've discovered that there's switches. It's not really the old right brain, left brain thing. That doesn't actually exist. It's like when the myth about multitasking was kind of shot down. Well, that was from actual brain science, realizing that when the brain is doing one task and then you jump to another task, this task shuts down, and when you jump back, it takes you like 20% of the task time to get back to where you left off. So you get the impression that you're jumping back and forth across all these different lines of activity, but you're actually very unproductive and very inefficient and not getting a lot done. So the brain science basically said, prioritize and then double down on achieving and exceeding not exceeding, but hitting whatever the objective is on one line, move to the next line, do the same thing. So attack, commit, take it off your to-do list, attack, commit, take it off your to-do list. Then you're maximizing the way your brain's designed without any wasted time. Well, that's the same thing with creative thinking and innovation. So your brain has a switch that turns on when you're task-oriented, and the brain focuses on helping you with that. And then it has a switch that clicks on to allow you to be innovative, which is kind of what they call the foraging switch, which we mentioned before. It's the ancient instinct to look for the next place where you can find food and shelter and safety. And therefore, that's why the human race wandered all over the place and eventually spread all over to all the different continents, because they needed one more piece of fruit over the next hill because they'd eaten all the fruit where they were. And that switch, now that they found it, they realize, okay, so it's not left brain, right brain. It's actually a part of the brain turning on, part of the brain turning off. And then there's certain exercises you can do, and you just have to force yourself, like I said, my examples, to take that to-do list and try to push it out of your head in some forceful way. Whether it's that morning session or whether it's for the 25% of the day where you allow your mind to just kind of wander a little bit and kind of sit back and look at all the surfers across the whole beach. Just don't focus on the tip of your surfboard. Just enjoy it and look at it and see the context. Because if you do that, you might see a big old fin moving through the water that you wouldn't have seen otherwise, So it's cool. I mean, that's the biggest trend in leadership, because leaders are always hungry for creative input. And that's how the world really is going to get changed. You got to have somebody that walks in and says, yeah, what if we took the phone and shrunk it to the size of a pack of cigarettes and turned it into a supercomputer that has more computing power than, the Apollo moon landing computer had, which is what Steve Jobs said. And, that changes the world.
It does. I'm curious, as you talk about the brain science, whether you're familiar with Stephen Kotler's work on flow, because the things that you're talking about sound like flow research to me. Is that what have you come across this work?
Yeah, I have. And because he references SEALs a lot in there. He's worked with some of us. It's funny because I'm part of a board called Best Robotics, and we're getting ready to do a launch of something called Mind Lab. And it's part of that is trying to figure out how to reignite creativity and innovation in adult professionals. So it's not science, technology, math. It's not the clinical, mechanical kind of learning. It's throwing them into a crucible of challenges with limited time and having a group of them try to find a way and bond together and basically rapid prototyping and do it over and over again, or do it in a very challenging way. Change some of the injects, change some of the assumptions at some point to inject frustration, and also shorten the amount of time left because you wasted time because somebody changed the assumptions, because that's the way life is. Somebody comes in and says, hey, guess what? You don't have this much money, or hey, guess what? You don't have that much time. So when we started going down that path, we started talking about essentially what he focused on, which is who's the best candidate for this service or product that we're trying to develop. And I said, well, I think the best product is the elite performer. And the elite performer, whether it's a corporation or a team within a corporation in an industry that's got a lot of high competition energy, they're looking for an edge, they're looking for a difference. So Olympic trainers, they do very marginal, optimized changes in little micro elements of an Olympic athlete's performance. And it's just enough to move them up 3 slots, in the pecking order. The same thing with SEALs. Again, guys that Kotler talks about, where you bring them in and they look at what the SEALs are doing, and they come up with a better way to do physical training that gives them higher energy, lets them recover faster. They end up with more agility and mobility, or they weren't doing agility and mobility because they were just lifting weights or something, so that they're told how mobility and agility is actually going to enhance their overall athleticism, and therefore it's going to enhance their overall ability to leap and bound and jump and crawl and do all the things that you have to do as a commando, and it worked. So that flow state that he talks about is it's not just an adrenaline rush, it's what happens to your brain and all the chemicals in your body when it achieves that hyper performance on the edge state. Whether you're a mountain climber, right, or what would you call it, an extreme skier, or he cites all kinds of these different, some of the surfers doing these massive waves, and it's all part of the brain science again. It's understanding what happens in the brain. Anecdotally, I think we all kind of got it. They call them adrenaline junkies. That would be the label, but it is and it isn't. It's more than that, and there is a state of mind when you're on that kind of edge of capability that's euphoric, and it's very addictive. So it's the same kind of science applied to the human brain, and understanding how the brain works and where what its limits are, or maybe there are no limits, and then how do you maximize the use of your brain? So it all kind of folds into the divergent thinking and neuroscience and all that. And that's all getting applied to leadership, as well as all the, the different sports and elite groups that I just mentioned.
I love it. I love how the brain science is helping us unleash human potential in application for creating wonderful futures for our businesses and for humanity as a whole. Marty, this has been awesome. As always, I love your thinking. I love your work. You're a huge model for me. And I so appreciate all the work that you do out in the world and the books that you produce, both your leadership books and your fiction books, which are awesome. So where can people find out more about you, the books, and anything else you want to tell us?
Well, first off, that was very nice of you to say. I appreciate that at 10 o'clock in the evening here on the right coast of the United States. You go to martystrongbenimble.com. I have all my books, links to my 9 novels, plus the 2 business books. Probably at the end of this year, my next business book will come out called Be Different. And the Marty Strong Be Nimble's pretty much got it all. I've got my articles. I've got links to some of my podcasts, some of the other things that I've done. That's the place to go.
Oh, you're awesome. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Thank you for staying up late. 10 o'clock is way past my bedtime, so I appreciate you staying up late to be here. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
Well, thanks for having me, Zoe. I really appreciate the opportunity.
That was just a wonderful conversation. I just love connecting with Marty. I really have so much admiration for everything about him, really, like his life experience, his dedication every day to being the best version of himself, and his commitment to making a big difference, first in the SEALs and now in business, and his support of leaders. His writing is awesome, both his nonfiction, his leadership books, and his fiction, which I thoroughly enjoy. So after we pressed stop, I interrogated him for a whole bunch of extra information about how to get known as a fiction writer. So that was really wonderful. But really, like, what I got from this interview that has really stayed with me, or is staying with me, is this idea that how much we need to look after ourselves and create ourselves as an environment for incubating the future for and with the people that we lead. So if we don't have a clear head, we can't think about the future. So those fundamentals of self-care really come to the fore in such a practical and important and far-reaching way. So if there's ever been a better reason to do self-care, apart from, stay alive, then it's about the future, and the future of your leadership and the future of your team and organization. So tactically, what I'm going to adopt is Marty's suggestion of doing the Vision Quest stuff, about getting focused on what kind of future you are imagining and start to push out the time horizons. I think that's a wonderful habit to incorporate. That, and keeping 25% of your calendar free for doing that visioning kind of work, whether it's following trends or talking to people who've done stuff, as Marty suggested, that you'd like to emulate in a different industry, etc. So I'd love to hear what you took from the show, what you found valuable, and what you've put into place. You can email me, zoe@zoerouth.com. You can hop on the link and drop a note on the Facebook page. That would be awesome. It makes it more of a conversation to find out what people are taking from the shows. And you can also rate and review the show. That actually makes a really big difference for people being able to find the content. And I think if we have better leaders, we have a better world. So I'm on a mission to get these messages and these insights out to as many people as possible. And you can help by sharing the episodes that you enjoy and find valuable. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future, or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.